This is Don't Mind Me, I'm Different. And I'm your host, Ron Sowers, here to teach you how to put a foot in depression's ass and turn ADHD from a perceived weakness into a superpower, where you can be the hero in your own story. Let me be your guide to join in the legions of Avengers just like yourself. Speak out and break the chains of this stigma. So you'll be the one at your job that people come to instead of running away from. Take back your life and own your difference. Just a quick disclaimer, I'm just a guy with ADHD and depression. I am not a professional. So if you are struggling with these, depression especially, please seek out professional help before it's too late. Hey guys, welcome back to episode 18 of Don't Mind Me, I'm Different. I'm your host, Ron Sowers, and today I'm pumped to hang out with PK Kulasegram. I hope I got that right, PK. Anyway, we're diving into the wild world of ADHD, and PK's bringing some serious fire. He was diagnosed late with ADHD and autism, and he talks about his struggles not only in school, but in keeping a job for longer than 6 months, to becoming the co-founder of Simply Equality, a social enterprise that is smashing barriers for neurodivergent LGBTQ plus folks. We're talking shame, spite, and how to make work actually work for us, not the other way around. So grab your headphones, some water, and turn it up, and let's get into it. Because this one's going to hit different. Trust me. PK, tell me a little bit about your experience and history with ADHD.
Um, so it took me a little while to realize that I had ADHD. And the first person who kind of suggested it was my partner, who's autistic and also realistically has ADHD, and was like, "I think you might, have ADHD." And I was like, "Nah, that's like because I kind of got hung up on the hyper element of ADHD. I was like, I'm not
Mm-hmm.
particularly hyperactive. I don't kind of feel the need to be moving all of the time." And then I kind of looked more into it and found more a diverse sort of range of experiences of people with ADHD. So they weren't just because I think a lot of resources that you initially bump up against are written with a little boy in mind, and obviously I was not a little boy, and I was in fact in my late 20s, and so I'd learned various coping mechanisms. And yeah, kind of the more I found out about it, and the more I heard from different people sharing their experience, the more it kind of made sense, I think. And I know that for me, there was kind of a lot of shame about stuff
Mm-hmm.
that I just thought I should be able to do, like be able to focus or just do stuff. And I think the thing that really stuck with me was seeing someone talk about like the danger of the ADHD sit, when you kind of are like, oh, just like take a little break from a task, and then you sit down, and then you just kind of get paralyzed with indecision and can't move. And I was like, oh, that sounds like me. And so I went to a GP and was like, hey, I'd like to maybe explore this. Um, and they ended up referring me. It took a long while, and then they lost some paperwork, which then meant I got fast tracked because obviously it's a massive issue if you lose people's medical stuff. And I went into that appointment, talked to the consultant. He was like, so how we usually treat ADHD is, through medication. Um, I was very aware of kind of like there can be judgment around taking medication and stuff, and I didn't want to like, even though I knew I really wanted medication to like help with stuff,
Mm-hmm.
I didn't want to seem too eager in case they were like, oh no, you just want drugs. Um, had this like 45-minute conversation where I was like, this is why I think I have ADHD. These are all of my struggles. This is how long they've been here. And the consultant very nicely sort of listened to me, info dump. And then, like, again, after 45 minutes and having him talk about, so these are the treatment plans. This is what we'd recommend. You need to get an ECG. I was like, so do I have ADHD? And he just sort of looked at me and was like, I didn't even really need to have this consultation. Just your answers on your screening questions were like so indicative of
Mhm.
ADHD that it was that apparent. Um, and yeah, so in a lot of ways, that was kind of, I think, a relief to get that understanding of how my brain worked and then just kind of be able to actually look at ways of working that worked for me and my brain rather than what everyone said I could be able to do.
Okay. So like, how does that like feel when you got that diagnosis? Was that reassuring or?
I think it was validating for me because it was just like because I'd spent so long at that point kind of coming to terms with having ADHD that by the time I got the diagnosis, I was like, okay, it's nice to know that I was right. I think there was also like a little bit of grief in terms of unlearning
Yeah.
sort of ableism and being like, okay, cool, I'll never be quote unquote normal, or this is always going to be a struggle. And I kind of, before I had ADHD meds, I thought I was really good at relaxing, and then I had ADHD meds and was like, oh no, like this is actually what it feels like to be able to take a breath, to slow down and
Mhm.
actually consciously relax and take my time. And it was, for me, like really
Yeah.
life changing to just not not have to be struggling. So like because like because my brain was constantly looking for dopamine, it wasn't always doing that in healthy ways. So, the very classic like impulsive spending and stuff to get that very quick dopamine rush. Or like I just spent so much time being angry because that was quite an energizing emotion for me. So like looking for fights and kind of pushing
Mm.
that I had the energy to just get through the day and do stuff, or looking for sort of ways of acting. Like I frequently joked that I kind of lived my life out of spite. So someone would be like, "Oh, you can't do this," and I'm like, "Well, fuck you, then I'm going to do it." Sorry, I don't know if you're allowed to swear or
Mm.
not, but apologies if not. But
Yeah. You're fine.
um, so I would, and then once I kind of got ADHD meds, I could actually be like, "Well, is this fight worth my time? Like,
Yeah.
I don't have to be bothered. I can actually just be me." I know, like, it's controversial in terms of medication. People are like, "Oh, like I just felt like a zombie," and for me, it's the opposite. I just feel more myself, and it's been, yeah, really
Mm.
nice to just be able to be like, oh, cool, this is just me. And, it's not like it hasn't fixed everything because, like, I also did a bunch of ADHD coaching so I could learn more strategies, so I could, like, work with my brain, and then just had the very lucky thing of also being autistic and ADHD and neurodivergence being a special interest. And so going down massive research holes just to see, okay, what are the mechanisms? Like, what is the role of dopamine in just general life? Because we hear about it from like kind of an executive function, but it also plays a really important role in pain modulation, even though they're not clear on what that role is. And it was just really interesting. And the more I kind of learned about that, the more I could actually take a
Yeah.
step back, and rather than going down this fun shame spiral of, oh, I'm just really shit at everything and I can't ever stick at anything, I could be like, oh, there are reasons for that. And like with the right support, I can stick at something. I just can't stick at crap.
Yeah. No, I definitely can relate to that out of spite, you know, because I lived most of my life, out of spite. Like, oh, you tell me I can't do something, then I'm gonna go prove you wrong. Um, and it's interesting that you talk about the medication and I my particular ADHD, like I haven't had to um use medication. It's not hasn't been necessary, but like what's really been helpful is like the mindfulness in my life and just creating the space. Um in my day, and being able to take a step back and actually look at the patterns and who I'm becoming has been like huge for me, and I'm sure that's what
Mhm.
it's similar to the medication, but it's like the medication is like only one part of this whole like puzzle that creates like a help. um it's like I often hear is pills don't teach skills. So
Sure,
like
yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, I
it's
think,
definitely. Yeah, go ahead.
oh yeah, and I totally agree. Like, I think it is that thing of like the temptation to be like, oh yeah, medication just magically fixed everything, and it didn't. For me, it
Mm-hmm.
was the stepping stone, and it just helped get to a stage where I could then learn the skills and take the time and be like, okay, cool. Like, it was kind of like I always liken it as like ADHD can often feel like spinning a lot of plates all at once, and all
Yeah,
medication allowed me to do was take a step back, see those plates that I was spinning, and then actually take steps to be like, what plates can I stop spinning and put down, right? Because I don't need to
yeah,
live my life constantly spinning plates. And sometimes I think, especially with ADHD, you're like, well, I have to do everything, I have to say yes to everything, because like I only have energy right now, and like tomorrow, who knows what will happen? And then you end out in this
yeah,
like constant cycle of burnout and overwhelm and overwork. And like you said, that mindfulness piece of being able to like make dedicated time to stop and figure out what quiets your mind. For me, medication is very important in quieting my mind, but like I also have like other sort of co-occurring conditions that can influence that. And it was just like, for me
mm-hmm.
personally, I was like, yeah, it just takes one thing off my plate, but it's because it works for me. Whereas like I respect lots of other people, like it doesn't work for me, it actually makes stuff worse, etc. And I think it's all about having options, and it's that holistic portion, right? Because often, like, doctors will be like, yeah, take the meds, you'll just be magically fine. And it's just not how it works. I can take meds, but if you don't teach me the
Mm-hmm.
skills to actually regulate my emotions, to look at those patterns that I've looked at, to understand how my brain works, and then even on a societal level, if you don't equip employers with the skills to support ADHD individuals in the workplace, you're ultimately just setting people up to fail, because so many people are like, oh, it's ADHD. It's just like, look, there's a squirrel disease, and you're just a bit random and extravagant. And it's like, no, it can be incredibly disabling for a variety of reasons. Like like
Yeah,
struggles with emotional regulation can be really, really debilitating in a professional and a personal capacity. Like, I know that when I was
yeah,
operating out of spite, it could be a lot of real hard work in terms of close relationships with me, because I was so ready to fight all of the time. And it wasn't like I was a particularly angry person, but like
mm-hmm.
I was constantly looking for something so that I could get up and go. And anger, fighting was the easiest way of accessing that. And then suddenly being able to be like, well, I don't have to look for that. I can look for healthy things. So I can be like, okay, I'm struggling with my energy levels. What would help? Is it actually I just need to take a break? Or, like
Yeah,
that kind of stuff.
yeah, and I'm sure there's some of it was like you got to prove yourself, um, feeling the need to prove yourself, and it's like this that all or nothing mindset where if I can't do everything, I can't do anything type thing. And do you think that depression is depression something that you've struggled with?
Yeah, like I've really struggled with depression for most of my life, and like anxiety as well, which is a very common thing for a lot of ADHDs as well. Like for me, it was compounded by being mixed race and trans and queer and growing up
Yeah.
with all of that kind of stuff, and being like so many facets of your identity so far from the norm kind of coming together to really feed some of the more detrimental aspects of ADHD, like rejection sensitive dysphoria and all of that kind of trauma
Mm-hmm.
building. And so, like, especially in my early 20s and late teens, I really wasn't invested in being alive, to be honest. Like, I didn't think I would get to 30. I'm 33 now, and like just, yeah, engaged in a lot of really, like in a lot of that classic thrill
Yeah.
seeking behavior to kind of do stuff, and just had these massive ups and massive downs. And, when I was in a really good space, I could do anything. It felt like that kind of, I'm on top of the world. Like, I can bang out 18,000 words in a day. And then the next
Mm-hmm.
day, you'd have a day where you can barely get dressed. And there was so much, for me, there was so much shame associated with that. And, like, there were also like people in my life, again, like a teacher once said to me, like, you're like a sparkler. You shine, you light up really, really bright at the start, and then you just go out. And I was like 16 when they said that to me,
Yeah.
and it really stuck with me because I was just like, well, something's wrong with me. Like, clearly, I can't ever finish stuff. Clearly, there is something wrong with me, and like, maybe I am just kind of a failure, and that I think really fed into that
Mm.
depression. And then, especially because I struggled settling down into a job, there was this like very consistent pattern of every 6 months I just ended up needing to leave because like after 6 months the novelty kind of wears off, and like I needed
Yeah.
stuff that was interesting to me.
Yeah.
And yeah, eventually I ended up finding my way into um, equality, diversity, and inclusion work. And then I could actually stick in jobs because I was interested, because it's constantly changing, because it is something I care deeply about. But also, a large part of that sticking power came from having access to medication and being able to more consistently work. But like that, if that had been the only thing that I had access to, I probably still would have struggled. I also got a bunch of support from that holistic perspective. So I got to work with an actual ADHD coach who was like helped me work out stuff that actually worked for me. So rather than saying, "Have you tried writing it down?" which does not work because I will, if I write it down somewhere, as soon as the book's closed, the thing ceases to exist. And was very good at
Mm.
being like encouraging me to be compassionate to myself. So being like, you might develop a strategy that works for 3 months that then stops working. That's okay. We just do new strategies, and what you'll probably find is you can come back to that, but it's about having multiple avenues of support and multiple options. And I think, again, at least for me personally, the biggest thing I struggle with as an ADHD is shame. Like there's so much shame around all of the things that I felt
Yeah.
like I should do that I just couldn't do, and like it seemed so objectively easy that it felt, yeah, there was just a lot of really, really deep-seated shame about I wish I could do it. And then I kind of figured out that actually, yeah, it wasn't that I was less than. It was just that I was being asked to do something in a world that was fundamentally not made for me, and like
Mm-hmm.
to work in ways that just didn't work for me. And it's kind of how I ended up in the work that I do, is just the world doesn't work for so many people, and it makes so many
Yeah.
people feel like they're the problem. And actually, it's not those people who are the problem. It is that we've designed it to work for someone who doesn't even really exist. And like,
Yeah.
instead of saying, hey, this doesn't work and this sucks for the vast majority of us, people just plug along. And so I want to be able to say, no, you can say, it would be really beneficial if I got to start later in the day. Because, like, I don't know about you, but I do not function well before 10 in the morning. So if people are like, let's
Mm.
have a 9 o'clock
Interesting.
meeting, I'm very useless. Um, and I think, yeah, like,
Yeah.
often so much of this is, it's just free to do. It's just about being like, okay, cool. Where can we have flexibility? Where can we be a little bit creative? Even small things like if you need to listen to music, okay, cool. You can wear headphones so you can focus. because like I remember
Yeah.
when I was a kid, I'd always listen to music to like study, and my mum came in and was just like, "Oh, you can't study like that because all of the research shows that it's just distracting you." And I was like, "Well, if I
Yeah.
turn the music off, I can't focus, and like the music is here so I can study." And just and like stuff that's like very innocuous and well-meaning, right? But if all parents get us this information about, oh, don't let your kids study with music because it doesn't actually help them, then they'll do what they think is well-meaning, even though actually, for me, that was how I could study and like do my schoolwork. Is it was just listen to music.
Yeah, no, I definitely relate to that because I had a very similar experience with my mom. Like she didn't necessarily say that I couldn't study. She just didn't understand how I could study with music. Like I even continue depending on what I'm doing, but like I need to have music. I can't have total silence
That
um
was the word.
going on because it's just too much. It's I need to have some other something playing, that really helps like get my brain working in an optimal space. Um, yeah, and I'm sure like talking about, like there was a lot of stigma um, growing up for you that a lot of people with ADHD just have that one barrier. Like every stigma, based on your race, based upon um, your culture or experience, um, and your sexuality can add another barrier that you have to get past. Um, in terms of like identifying who you are and like what that looks like. And you said a very interesting thing about, like being, most of the places that I've ever worked at were, you know, designed for me. And I don't think that it's designed for really anybody. That's, very few people exist that system is set up, and even in the place that I'm working at, I try to, kind of job craft and create like, either conversations with my leaders on how to better like manage a situation with me. Since I expressed that I have ADHD, some are more open than others, but I always feel like, there's no matter where you're at, like there needs to be an adjustment on how work um, is 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 like can be more productive for other individuals. So you've developed a business on making those things possible, right?
Yeah. So I run a social enterprise called Simply Equality with my business partner, who is a totally blind trans woman, and specifically it
Wow.
looks at the intersectionality of disability and LGBTQIA plus identities because there's so much overlap and like within like that obviously we encompass neurodivergent, so like ADHD, autism and stuff, because there is just a lot of overlap between those two communities, and yet often we try and tackle them as disparate and separate when it's really hard to actually unpick them from each other. So, like for example, a thing that almost
Mm-hmm.
stopped me getting a formal ADHD diagnosis and a formal, or and like other formal neurodivergence diagnoses that I probably like won't like is because I knew that actually they might be used to deny me care. So like because I had like mental health diagnoses and ADHD, when I
Mm-hmm.
then got affirmative care, I was really worried that the surgeon would turn around and be like, "Oh, you can't make a decision because you have ADHD, and this is therefore like an impulse thing." And like very luckily, like the surgeon was just like, "Well, no, you're a full ass fucking adult, and you know, you can make a decision, and that's it, and just believe me." But
Mm-hmm.
it was like a legitimate fear that I had that almost did stop me from like actually pursuing that formal diagnosis. And similarly, just knowing like there are some countries you can't immigrate to if you've got an ADHD diagnosis and aren't on medication, because as far as they're concerned, you're a drain on resources. And all of that is has kind of gone into inform the work that we do at Simply Equality because it is about kind of three main pillars. So there's like that educate, which is about working with organizations, businesses, senior managers to kind of be like, this is what you can do to make your environment more inclusive of disabled LGBT plus people. There's the kind of empowering, and that's more on an individual level. So it might be managers, it might be people who have ADHD, it might be trans people, it might be some flavor of all of those in like one person, just to be able to advocate for themselves. Because I think, being able to say, hey, like the example you gave of you work in somewhere that has been designed for you, but you get to talk to your like senior leaders and say, hey, like this is what I actually need to thrive. And often,
Yeah.
especially if you're really late diagnosed, you don't even know what you need to thrive. You're still trying to figure that out. And there can be this huge, huge pressure to just know already, right? To be like, yep, I
Yeah.
already know exactly what it is that I need and want, when if you've only got your diagnosis like a month ago, you may not. You might be like, this, can we try it? And I think encouraging people to be able to say, look, if it doesn't work, that's fine, just try something else. But also the flip side of that is employers have to be willing to let you try and to like be creative and to work with you. And so like for me, I try and get people to think about it as an opportunity to grow and to do things differently rather than as an obstacle to overcome. Because like if we look at things like flexible working hours, which can be so, so useful for anyone who's got ADHD, but also for anyone who's got caring responsibilities, right? If you need to get to school pickup to pick up your kids, if you've got an elderly relative who you look after, if you are Muslim and you have set prayer times, like having flexible start times can mean that you can actually worship in a way that
Yeah.
works for you. And it's like free. Like it doesn't cost the company anything to implement that and to say, hey, look, we've got core hours. We trust you to do
Yeah.
your job. Just, this is the core chunk where we need people in the office. Outside of that, do whatever you want. And all of the research then indicates that actually you have a more productive, healthier, better workforce. And yet so many companies are really reluctant to do that. And it's always kind of in my role with Simply Equality, it's about teasing out where's that reluctance coming from. you know, and actually making them
Hmm.
see that it's not a niche issue, because that's another bit of objection we get, which is just, it's a very small amount of the population, and it's like, it's really not. And also often when you
Yes.
actually start supporting them, you're supporting way more people in the process. And to be honest, even if it was just a very tiny percentage of the population, like, what's the harm in supporting them? They're still just as important, and we have like a huge amount to
Yeah.
contribute. And especially if it costs you literally nothing to do, what have you got to lose?
Yeah, I'm sure. And some of the bias against it would be, this is going to take time to learn, to figure out. And, it really isn't. It's more about just, you don't have to have a deep level of understanding of the specific differences. You just got to understand that there is differences, and and trust the people that are coming to you, that they're not making an excuse for their behavior. They're just saying, like, this is how I am and this is how I see things. This would work for me. Just give me a shot. What would you say to somebody who is like, well, if somebody wants to show up late, but that's not fair to the rest of, the ones that show up at a specific time?
I mean, I really hate the fairness argument, to be honest, because people are like, oh, that's just like not fair. And it's like, it's also not fair to ask someone to work in a way that doesn't work for them and puts them at a disadvantage. And when you try and create
Yeah.
fair workplaces, often people conflate this with equal treatment. So everyone has to have the exact same thing. And if you break it down into it, like the very common analogy of, if you're trying to watch like a baseball game and you just go, okay, the fairest thing to do is give everyone a box that's the same size. That's great for some people, but for really short people, that's going to be like functionally useless. And for some people who don't even need the
Yeah.
box, there's no point. And so I think what I tend to say is realistically, if you want to create more fairness, you could actually just open it up and say, look, if other people also need to come in later, they can. If some people need to come in earlier, they can. But fundamentally, it is actually about addressing need. So going, okay, cool,
Mm.
like, you know, we can all be understanding of a degree of lateness or whatever and like kind of own it and own our behavior. But like if you're like some things will always feel unfair because when we're actually treating people and giving them the support they need, some people may need more or less support than others. And actually, like, it's probably a more helpful framing of like what is just and what is going to enable us to actually have outcomes where everyone gets to thrive. So, like, I might think it is, I don't know, unfair that someone else gets something. And again, so I feel like I'm going around in a circle, but I think also a lot of those arguments go like, oh, well, if we do it for you, we'll do
Yeah.
it for everyone. And in the example of like, if people get to come in late, like, okay, what would be the harm in allowing more people to come in later? Like is that actually a problem, or is it just a problem because it makes you uncomfortable and it feels unfair because in your working life you didn't get an adjustment? Right? Because like that's often where these attitudes come from, which
Yeah.
is like I had to be there on time and I just made do, and I'm here now, and it's like that's great. Was it a struggle for you? Was it
Yeah.
hard?
But
Right?
was it fair for you?
Yeah. So like just because you had to go through something that was
So
unfair,
just
why would you keep it in place? Make it fair for other people. Like
yeah. So just pretty much like asking them questions about, what their objections,
yeah, it's,
in a way.
yeah. It's understanding where it's coming from, right? Like realistically, and that's I think the more
Yeah.
curious and compassionate we can stay with each other, then the more likely we can kind of get change. Because often, like we're all people, and we love to pretend we're all very rational beings, but we're realistically not. Um, like we are
Yeah.
emotional, and we like things to feel relevant. And that whole the example of coming in late or like and like people have very different um reactions, emotional reactions to stuff. So like some people get like really really offended if someone is even 5 minutes late for a meeting. Some people really don't care.
Mhm.
And, you know, like, I think it's really important to meet people where they are and say, hey, look, I really struggle with like lateness. You know, what can I do to support you so that you can be here on time? If we moved the meeting to a different time, would that help? Kind of thing. So that you can actually both work to meet each other's needs, right? Because we're not saying, oh, you just have to kind of accept stuff that doesn't work for you. It is you have to find the
Yeah.
flexibility and the creativity to figure out what works for more people. And once you kind of get into that mindset of we're all on the same page and all of us just want to be able to do a good job, and it's about staying curious about what that looks like for different people. Because, yeah, more often than not, like, there can be a real I think toxic mentality of, well, it was like a difficult thing for me and I just sucked it up and got on with it. And everyone else needs to suck it up and get on with it. And the question I tend to pose is, well, what if someone had just made it easier for you? And what if you hadn't had to suck it up and get on with it?
Mm.
How much better would your life have been? Because that's fundamentally what we're
Yeah,
proposing.
definitely. Yeah, definitely. And it's about like, asking those questions and having a better communication. I feel I've seen in leaders where it's like if somebody's showing up consistently late, don't like ding them and be like, "Well, you're late. Don't do that again. You're you're showing up sloppy today." Like be like, "Well, what's going on? What is what is going on in your life, or what is the problem with necessarily showing up here? How can we talk about that and maybe fix that together, and it's only going to like create a better, like the leaders are just going to get better at communicating and understanding, and developing a sense of empathy, which can only be a good thing, and they can only bring that out into their other relationships. So it's like it's creating this thing that can grow and help people to become better, and I've always like, been able to see that. Well, not always, but like recently have been able to see that, in the interactions when stuff that really hasn't happened, that wasn't right. And I needed to, talk to my managers in a way that communicated the best that I could what was going on. And if that didn't work, then there was other avenues that I could go on. But it's being able to have those conversations in a productive way. So, do you work with strictly the employers, or do you work with the actual employees?
So we do both. So like we kind of have like the differing arms. So like an employer might get us to run a workshop on neurodiversity, and that's kind of for
Mm-hmm.
general employees who want to learn a little bit more about it. And kind of how we structure our workshops is moving from not just awareness to actually tools where you can be a little bit more creative, where you can have those conversations. So we use like a framework of compassionate curiosity, which is a psychological concept, and kind of how we define it is, that being able to empathize and put yourself in other someone else's shoes and use that knowledge
Yeah.
to actually want to kind of grow and connect in a genuine way. And so I think, that example you gave of being able to say, hey, look, this is the stuff, this is what I'm struggling with, or, rather than assuming that lack of eye contact, for example, means someone is untrustworthy immediately, and just being like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, you couldn't make eye contact, so therefore you're like lying to me. Being like curious about it, curious about
Yeah.
where that idea stems from, and just thinking, because culturally, even like eye contact looks really different in different cultures. Some people have eye contact as a sign of respect, and when you then bring in neurodivergence into it, it's like, cool. What is the most important thing in this conversation? Is the most important thing for me to look at you, or is it for you to feel listened to? In which case, this is what I need to do
Mm-hmm.
to listen to you. What do you need so that
Yeah.
you can feel like you're being listened to? Because this is often the thing, is it's unlearning, and it's owning that there is a level of discomfort because you're not getting what you were taught means someone is listening to you, right? So like
Mm-hmm.
there is working with the employers and employees to kind of create that bigger curiosity piece, but also individual sort of ADHDers or other disabled people, LGBTQIA plus people, to actually sit and say, okay, cool, these are the kind of skills we can give you so that you can go into the workplace and say, hey, look, let's have these conversations, kind of thing. Like I always,
Yeah.
whenever I'm running workshops, I always use this example, which is like almost all of us have, like at a family event, there's always that one person who's going to say something abhorrent, right? Like you just know they're gonna say something
Mm-hmm.
that's absolutely trash, and like by this point you just kind of
Yeah.
given up on them. It's ever like, and for the purpose of this like example, their name is Uncle Steve. Like it's a fictional person. If you have an Uncle Steve who's nice, I apologize, but like in this example, it's Uncle Steve, right? And like everyone's just like, oh, he's just like that.
Yeah.
Like we
Uncle
don't we don't
Steve.
we don't bother talking to Uncle Steve. He's just kind of he'll say that, like whatever, just leave him. And you never want to be that person, because like what everyone is saying then is,
Yeah.
I've written them off, and I don't think they're capable of change. I think they aren't capable of growth. And I think from an employer and an employee perspective, the thing to kind of change your mindset on is when someone comes up to you and tells you, hey, something isn't working, regardless of how they do that, right? Because, like, sometimes you've had a really shitty day, and sometimes it's the 50th instance of the thing that isn't working, and you do not have the emotional capacity to sit and be like polite about the impact something is having on you. So, again,
Yeah.
regardless of how that is said to you, if someone has bothered to come up and be like, this is not working for me, what they're saying is, I think you are capable of change and growth. And like, I believe in
Mm-hmm.
you. And I think fundamentally that's a really powerful thing to keep in mind. Because often, like, none of us like to be told that what we've done has hurt someone or that it's wrong or to feel attacked, right? But if we reframe it as
Yeah.
when someone points out how we can do better, what they're saying is they believe we
Mm.
can do better. And, like, obviously, there's kind of nuance. Like, I'm not saying criticize for the sake of criticism, but I think if we're talking about a specific ADHD kind of disability, autistic thing, and someone says, look, you know, I'm finding this meeting really stressful because, like, X, Y, and Z, could we do something about it? Could we change it? Like, if we start to look at that as an
Mm-hmm.
opportunity for growth and development, then we'll actually get a lot faster, like a lot further faster.
Yeah. So one thing that I notice about myself is like I struggle with, the way somebody talks to me can really set my emotions off. Like it can really like upset me. It can throw off and that throws off my rhythm. That puts me in a total different like productivity mindset. Especially if somebody um, talks down to me, as if I should have already known something and I don't, and I already expressed that it's the first time that I'm hearing that. Um, what would you suggest on like how to express that to somebody that's continuing to do that or making lewd jokes that aren't like I personally just don't find funny, or I don't think we're in a place in our relationship that's appropriate.
I think that's a really good question. I think there are kind of two parts to it, right? So there is the kind of
Mm-hmm.
from a personal level, like I know I can struggle with perceived rejection and like tone, and like sometimes I will like and but I can own that going into those conversations. So like often if I'm trying to have a
Mm-hmm.
conversation with someone and let's use the example of someone who I feel has talked down to me, right? Like if I just go into that conversation and go, "Hey, I feel like you're talking down to me," that person is instantly on the defensive, and they're probably not going to
Yeah.
listen or engage with what I have to say. Whereas if I go and I say, "Hey, look, I'm cards on the table here. Like, I'd like to talk to you about some stuff that's kind of come up for me in some of our interactions. Would you be open to listening to that, or like, is this a good time?" And it gives them like what that kind of question does, right, is if they say yes, they are already psychologically in a space where they're more likely to listen to you, which is good. I tend to be like,
Mm-hmm.
I obviously like have ADHD, so I can struggle with like RSD, and I just want to understand what's going on between us because, like what I've noticed is in this interaction, I can come away feel like it can kind of bring this kind of stuff up, and I don't know, and I kind of want to understand what you mean when you say that. So, for example, if someone is like, if you've kind of said, hey, I don't really understand that, and someone has, I don't know, like laughed at you or said something that's a bit like, oh, like really, you don't know that, kind of saying, hey, like, I get that maybe you've been doing this for a while,
Mm-hmm.
but like, I just kind of want to understand what was going on for you when you said that so that I can make sure we're on the same
Yeah.
page. And if you kind of approach it from the what was going on for you, like what is this, then you can actually be dealing with facts as well. Because sometimes it is our ADHD being a complete nightmare and being like, this is a thing, and I think this is happening, and it's not. And like that can be a very helpful way of
Yeah.
establishing it's not happening. But equally, sometimes it is happening, and just making someone actually think about what was coming up for them and saying that. And again, like kind of repeating, like, I genuinely do want to understand what is going on here because, like,
Yeah.
for me, it felt a little bit dismissive, and I was kind of taken aback that you seemed really surprised that I didn't know this thing. So I just want to understand what was going on for you there. And I think, yeah, like asking
Yeah,
those
I
questions.
definitely.
Yeah. Did that help at
Hmm.
all?
No, that no, that's good. Like that's definitely it comes from like that curiosity mindset. Like I'm just curious as to why what you're thinking and what was going on for you that you said that.
Yeah.
Instead of like attacking them and being like, you hurt me and you shouldn't say that. And they would become more defensive. Because and you talked about the ADHD brain, just sometimes, it could just be like the wind shifts and my mood changes. It could be that it's not often, but sometimes it's like I'm up on top of the world and then all of a sudden I think about something and or the depression comes in out of left field and I'm like a different person. I'm like like I'm laughing and now you don't even want to talk to me. Um and it's like that for a lot of us, because we're so sensitive um, to those subtle changes in our environment, in our own ecosystem that's going on in our bodies. So yeah, how do you um, get better at like knowing when to speak up about something and knowing it's just, hey, this might just be the way I'm feeling and there's nothing wrong that needs to be addressed.
I think it's kind of hard. I want to very briefly touch on like a thing you were saying in terms of like sometimes you could be like really up high and then suddenly like out of left field comes depression, and there's like a really interesting things in terms of not just ADHD but a lot of neurodivergent brains and how it works.
Hey there, ADHD warriors. I know you've been enjoying my podcast and I love you for it. That's why I got something special for you. I'm excited to invite you to join my Patreon community. Now, you might be wondering, why should I even sign up? Well, let me tell you exactly why it benefits you. First off, by becoming a Patreon supporter, you're not just helping me create more content. You're unlocking exclusive benefits just for you. We're talking early access to new episodes, bonus content that dives even deeper into powerful strategies for ADHD and depression, and exclusive merchandise. Plus, you'll get to join an amazing community of like-minded individuals who are all about advocating, learning, and thriving with ADHD and depression. But that's not all. As a member, you'll get a personal shout-outs in the episode and have the chance to vote on future topics. So your voice helps shape the direction of the show. Have burning questions or ideas you want to explore? Patreon members can submit questions directly to me and I'll tackle them in upcoming episodes or Q&As. So if you've been loving the podcast and you want to take this journey further, head over to patreon.com/Ron Sowers and choose the tier that works for you. Your support helps me continue to provide the ADHD and depression content you love while giving you the extra perks to get even more out of it. Join the family, level up your ADHD game, and let's keep this movement going strong together. I can't wait to see you on the other side. So once again, that's patreon.com/RONSOUERS. Your next step towards thriving with ADHD starts now.
So often like how kind of neurotypical brains work is you have the extreme emotion, and like the extreme positive emotion has an extreme negative pair, and like often what happens is you can just like swap between. What usually happens in a neurotypical brain is you have the extreme emotion, you come down a level, and then you swap over. In neurodivergent brains, you kind of jump. So often you can go from like, I'm super, super happy, and because that chemically feels very, very similar to I'm super, super fucking sad, your brain goes bloop, now we're
Yeah.
sad. And that can be really like it's a very useful thing to know in terms of being like, because like I used to have a lot of shame around being like I was really really happy and like I got into this, and maybe you'll relate, very unhealthy mindset of being like maybe I just don't like being happy because every time I'm really happy I immediately get really sad. And once I kind of understood
Hmm.
that connection of, oh, actually my brain will just kind of is more likely to jump from extreme to extreme really quickly rather than stepping down and
Yeah.
sidestepping. That was a much more helpful way of like shedding the shame. And I guess to kind of come back to the like that regulating emotions piece question that you were asking about in terms of advice, like I think it works. It's different for everyone. For me, meds are a core way of regulating that and having like a pretty good baseline. But I think also kind of knowing what is normal for you and where you're at, right? So if you're having an office interaction
Hmm.
and you know maybe you've had like a really shitty night's sleep, maybe you've had a fight with your partner, you're already not in a great space, and you get an email
Yeah.
and you think, wow, this person's being a condescending, awful person. Like it can be worth it's
Yeah.
really important to take that step back, right? Like I tend to be like, if I'm not like to check in with myself and be like, okay, what am I? And I use a traffic light system. So like green, all good. I'm probably reading this like for what it is. Yellow, a little bit
Hmm.
on the sensitive side, like maybe take some time. Red, I have been in a red state and read an email that I thought said one thing and was wildly insulting. Thankfully,
Hmm.
taken time
Yeah.
away and like gone screen like an empty chair and come back like an hour later and reread it and been like, oh, I misread that completely and that is not the vibe at all. I think it's so like step one is check out
Hmm.
what state am I? Am I in a state where like I am not actually in an emotionally good place? Okay, cool. Maybe I need to take a step back, take a little bit of a break, and then come back to this. And like, and this applies just even with an interaction, right? Because if you
Yeah.
have an interaction with someone that you're like, oh, this like kind of put my back up a little bit, it's always okay to say, hey, I actually just need like 5 minutes because like some stuff has come up for me and I just need to go like check it
Mm.
out. And again, it's that curiosity piece, right? Of like when you come back, if it's still sitting a little bit icky with you, kind of owning and saying, hey, look, like a thing came up for me. Would you be open to talking to about it? And if they're like, yes, cool, then you can proceed. If they're like, no, I don't want to talk about it, then you're like, okay, cool, I guess we can't really talk about it. But you also know that that wouldn't be a constructive conversation, right? Because if someone's saying, no, I don't want to talk about it, then you're like, cool, whatever. And you can kind of log that away and be like, if there's a pattern that
Yeah.
like routinely comes up, then I might need to talk to someone else about it because this person isn't open to talking about it. But at least you know you've tried. And
Mm.
so like, yeah, there's like that element. But yeah, if they are open, you can kind of be like, this stuff came up for me. Would you kind of be able to talk me through a
Yeah,
little
it's
bit about
good.
what was going on for you or like what you meant? Because I genuinely want to understand. And like and not all and like it won't always go kind of perfectly. Sometimes people will get defensive or be a little bit shitty. And if someone is shitty to you and you've tried to be kind to them and you've tried to just understand where they're coming from, and then it is worth being like, okay,
Yeah.
if it's a workplace, maybe like escalating it and being like, hey, I've tried to talk it out with this person. I find this when they deal with me and I'm really struggling with it. What can we kind of do about it? Obviously, I don't want to get them in
Hmm.
trouble. Like, get them in trouble if they're being awful, like if they're routinely saying lewd jokes that make you really
Yeah.
uncomfortable, and you're like, hey, my guy, this is a workplace. Maybe let's not make those kind of jokes. That makes me uncomfortable, right? And I think that's actually a very fair and important thing to say, like important thing to do, because like often
Yeah.
and especially like the other component is like relative power and safety, right? Like if you look like if you look a certain way, right? If you look like a straight white dude talking to another straight white dude, and I find this more often now that I've more transitioned, is guys will say stuff that they just would not say to me when I looked like a girl. And sometimes it is truly like, "Ooh, that's gross. Why are you saying this to me? That is like not okay." And
Yeah.
I've had to, and like the thing I have to remember is like in terms of relative power that I now hold is like they will take me more seriously than if it was they were saying this to a woman who then turned around and was like, "That's a gross joke, my guy." So I can sit and be like, "I don't have skin in the game in the same way anymore." Cool. Hey, that joke, like a very useful diffusing tactic can be, "Could you
Yeah.
explain the joke to me? I don't get why it was funny." Because often if it is a lewd or a
Mm.
sexist or
That's fun.
like
That's good.
misogynistic ableist joke, they will get really flustered and they won't be able to explain why it's funny because they know it's bigoted. And they can't be like, oh, it's funny because it's racist, because that is an objectively bad thing to say. But it can be a very good way of being like, that's not an appropriate thing, you know? So if someone is making like a really gross, very
Mm.
lewd, sexist joke, just being like, even if you do understand why it's funny, just turning around and being like, sorry, could you explain that joke to me? I don't understand why it was funny.
Yeah, I've heard definitely a similar one where it's like if somebody says like something, offensive or like a lewd joke, just to ask them to, could you please repeat that? And they'll usually be like, okay, that was
Yeah.
fucked up. Like I'm not gonna actually repeat that, because I see, and they can actually look at their own behavior because you're like, they're
Being
actually,
called out on it.
take, yeah, yeah, or they're actually seeing it for maybe the first time, and it's a good tactic. Um, yeah, definitely great tools, and I think they're like the most valuable tools when it comes to, neurodivergent people in the workplace to be able to use those tools, to express themselves and create an environment that works for them. Would you say that like maybe communicating like the fact that, like I have these ups and down moments, that it's something that I'm working on, but just to let you know that if you see me a certain way, that's not because of you, it's because that's the way that I am. Is that something that would be a good way to
Yeah. So I
communicate
feel
that?
like, and again, there's no perfect way. I think like like you kind of said that whole like I'm working on it. Sometimes like I have ups and downs, and this is like what that can look like. And again, kind of being open to, if I'm a little bit blunt, like let me know because like I'd rather know what works for you. And it's like kind of asking that question, right? So I think that I can find very helpful as a neurodivergent individual
Mm-hmm.
saying, this is how I need to communicate. It can be really blunt. I don't do well at small talk. What works for you to communicate? Because often people haven't even thought about what works for them, right? And when you ask them that, they can be like, oh, actually,
Mm-hmm.
like, I can be a little bit off put if you're too blunt, but it's really useful to know. And like, the really important thing I will also say is like neurodivergence, any form of marginalization, is an excuse to be awful to people. It's not a way of escaping accountability. And like, and
Mm-hmm.
like more often it's a lens. So being like, I really struggle with like my emotional regulation. So I may need to take 5 minutes in a meeting if I am like emotionally dysregulated so that I can participate well. Right? You're not saying like you're not gonna
Mm-hmm.
say like, cool, I can call you names because I'm neurodivergent, because that's just not how the world works. It's, hey, I might get like a little bit more spiky, so I'm gonna need to take a little bit of extra time. And I think like that's the difference. Is often like the a constant thing I have with employers and talking to people will be like, oh, I think X is autistic because like he really struggles with people and he's just kind of a dick. And it's like, well, he could be autistic, but he could also just be a dick. And like, even if he is autistic, that doesn't excuse him behaving like that. And it's again that kind of like, you don't want to be Uncle Steve, right?
Yeah.
And it's being like, hey, I
Yeah.
know I can be a little bit like brusque and direct. Like it's nothing personal. I'm not trying to be rude, but if at any point you find that like that's not working for you, let me know, and we can maybe work out a way in which we can communicate effectively. Because like I can't do small talk. It's really draining. Um, but I also understand that, and like that kind of
Mm-hmm.
thing is it's just being able to be like, like shouting at people.
Yeah, just
Yeah,
communicating where
right.
you're at,
And
but not in a way that's like blames the difference that you might have. It's just like, I'm working on this. I'm not trying to to be
but
rude,
like this is
but
the
like
thing.
maybe I need like
Yeah, or
5
like
minutes to like get better, because like
yeah,
this is so an area
yeah,
that's
or
tough
even
for
just
me.
like for me, I'll be like, hey, like I'm trying to listen. So like in my coaching, I sometimes have to do this. Where I'll be like, hey, look, um, I'm listening to you. My face is not gonna look like what you expect a neurotypical face to look like because I've run out of energy to mask and make my face look like
Mm.
emotions. So if something comes up for you and you're worried about what I'm thinking, just ask. That's all right. But like just so you know, I am listening. I'm here, you
Mm.
know. And just being kind of clear about what's going on for you, because like yeah, sometimes like because we all have our own traumas, right? And like especially in a workplace, like you might be like, oh, like wow, they're like really mean, and you're just like, no, I just like I always use this example because it kind of makes me laugh, which is when I was like at my old job, someone kind of emailed me to be like they had to cancel a support session that I had because like their family member had died, and I like wrote them an email back being like, "Hey, really sorry to hear it. Like, hey, don't worry about it. The session's not important. Take the time that you needed. Take the time that you need." And my partner had to be like, "I understand what you're saying, which is like for you the most pressing issue was like them taking the time they needed to grieve. You need to acknowledge their loss, babe. Like you need to say I'm really sorry for your loss." And I was like, "Well, that was implied." And they were like, "No, you need to explicitly
Yeah.
state it." And I think like that can be really useful is to have an extra set of eyes to be like, hey, like is this doing what I want to do? And also, yeah, like it makes me laugh because I was just like, yeah, for me,
Yeah.
I felt like I was being really nice by being like bypassing that and forgetting that and like yeah, and like
Somebody
being
else.
so
Yeah.
focused on like, no, absolutely take all the time that you need and forgetting to do the no, like I'm sorry for your loss and that's awful kind of thing because sometimes there is a place for social scripts like that. And acknowledging the loss is just as important as saying, really sorry to hear that. I'm sorry for your loss. Please, absolutely take all the time that you need. Like, I'll be fine. And I think, yeah, like,
Hmm.
it's like sometimes we'll get it wrong. And it is way better to get it wrong and learn from it than it is to be so terrified of getting it wrong that you never try at all and you don't learn or grow.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I hate to do this because it's been a great conversation. But yeah, um, is there anything that um you like my listeners how they can find you, and anything you want to give them, parting?
Um, so you can find me on LinkedIn if you look up PK Kulasegram, or if you Google simplyequality.com, that's the social enterprise I run, and that is an easier way of copy pasting my name and finding me on like socials. And I'm always willing to connect and chat. At the moment, I'm running a pay what you can coaching service for ADHD, neurodivergent, LGBTQI plus people, just because I wanted to give back to the community.
Okay,
So like, it's basically, hey, if you can't afford full price coaching, get in
awesome.
touch. And yeah, I do have at some point I will have a Substack where I'm just kind of putting my thoughts out and like my experience of being an ADHDer and like yeah, so like I'm always happy to kind of chat about this kind of stuff and yeah, follow along for Simply Equality stuff and like seeing some content that's hopefully useful and relevant and yeah,
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you for coming on the show. It's been very informative, and thank you for what
thanks
you
for having
do.
me.
It's definitely needed.
Yeah, and you too.
All right,
All right,
take care.
take care. Bye.
All right, guys, that's a wrap on this one. A huge thanks to PK Kulasegram for dropping so much wisdom today. Man, what a conversation. From unmasking ADHD to kicking down workplace walls, I'm still buzzing. So if you want to connect with PK, hit him up on LinkedIn. I got those contact details in the show notes, or check out simplyequality.com. That's simplyEqualityCom for more of their awesome work. They're even running a pay what you can coaching program for ADHD and LGBTQ plus folks. So don't sleep on that. Meantime, keep loving who you're becoming, my ADHD warriors. Subscribe, drop a comment, and let's keep this vibe going. Catch you next time. And as always, may the source be with you.